Hi, and welcome to the Virgin River Cafe Rewatch podcast. I'm Tracy,
I'm Gigi.
and here we are in season 3. Good morning, Gigi. How are you
Woo!
doing?
Good morning. I'm doing well, thank you. Very excited about the episode.
Yes, this is a pretty good one. It's a little. It starts off a little rough, but
That's all right.
this show is like it's like going to the carnival. It's a roller coaster ride. We're up, we're down, we're sad, we're happy. It's all the
Yeah.
emotions. It's everything.
Get you coming and going.
Yep. So I have my caffeinated beverage today. Today I am embracing some new flavors at one
All
of our
right.
local coffee shop. They brought one back, one of my favorites. It's a cookie butter latte, iced latte. Mm. The cookie
Okay.
butter cold foam with the Boscoff cookie crumbles on top. You can tell I like the sweet flavors. I'm a coffee snob, and I admit it, and I will pay for it. I don't want to, but I will.
It's okay.
And I can make it at home if I have to. But, it's back, and I need to embrace it, but I will pace myself because it's like too expensive. So what are you drinking today?
Today I am drinking Americano, and
Nice.
that was graciously made by a friend of mine
Oh,
who I
nice.
visited briefly, and he has a beautiful espresso bar in his house, and
Yes.
it's one to die for. Um,
Nice.
and
Homemade. With a fancy
homemade.
machine.
I'm telling you, it was lovely done. It was smooth. The coffee beans are fabulous.
They only get the
Exactly.
best beans. I
They
mean,
only get
right?
yes, they only get the best.
Nice.
So yes, so it was lovely. So thank you for asking.
Mm, wonderful. Well, now that we've been properly caffeinated,
Oh, we are.
because really, people, okay, I'm going to say it. People that drink decaf, like,
Oh, please.
why?
What?
Why? Like, are they just normally like awake and happy? I mean, like weirdos. Like,
I don't know. I don't get and I understand why people drink decaf,
no,
but I don't.
no,
From me personally, it's what's the point? I don't see the point in drinking decaf. It's
no.
just like if you're gonna drink decaf, go for tea. Just be done with it. You know what I
And
mean?
yeah, I agree. Like, why bother?
Yeah. Why bother? Because I don't think you get the flavor that you need to get out of decaf as you get in caffeinated.
And I know there's people out there that just love their decaf, but honestly, I can drink a 32-ounce coffee at 10 o'clock at night and go to bed. Like, it
Tell
doesn't
me.
have any effect on me at all whatsoever. It
Well,
just does not affect me.
I think for those of us who drink coffee on a constant basis and
Mm-hmm.
drink it throughout the day, that it doesn't affect us. I mean, you're talking to an X 13 cup coffee
Oh,
drink.
okay, that's even more than I partake.
When you're an ex pastry chef and you start your shift at 4 in the morning,
Okay,
and
yeah, I get that.
you're drinking coffee from 3 a.m. until say 3 p.m. in the
3 p.m.
afternoon. It's
It's
it's a
like one an
constant.
hour.
Well, exactly, because the coffee machine is on a constant go,
Yeah.
So all you're doing is just refilling your cup as you're
Oh,
going along the day until finally your doctor goes, okay, time out, girlfriend, no more. You got
yeah.
this. So coffee has been a part of my life as long as I've known. I think since I started, I think the last year of high school.
I started in college. I used to
Yeah.
get iced coffee and french fries at the little cafe between the buildings with my friend. And then when I was a social worker, we would meet. This is back. I'm dating myself. We had pagers. And
Oh
because
yeah,
this was
good
this
old
was cell phones were out, but they weren't like easily accessible. They were a little expensive, and
a
honestly,
little.
as a social worker in not so great neighborhoods in Long Beach, I should have had one, and I my parents finally bought me one because they were like, yeah, that's not safe, and we're worried, and here's a cell phone, even though it's a brick. Um, my social worker friend and I would text each other 99, like from what's that, Agent Smart or whatever, and his
Yeah,
girl
yeah.
Friday, whatever her name was, and
Go-
we were Agent 99, and so
Agent 99, yes.
we
That's
would
her. That's
text
her name.
99 and a time, and that's what time that meant. We need coffee. Meet us here. Meet at this location. We had a spot, and we would take a little while and we would take a break in our day and have some coffee. And that started needed
Yep.
it. Early mornings, late nights. It was a lot. 7 years as a social worker was a lot. So coffee, since you can't drink and drive and you can't do drugs while you're working, coffee was the best alternative. So
I guess it is. I guess it is.
all right.
Anyway,
Anyway, all right.
okay, ladies
So
and
here we
gentlemen.
are. Here we are in season 3. Now, season 3. I didn't say this when we talked about the first episode, but here's the second episode. It actually came out. It dropped on July 9th of 2021. So we were pretty knee deep, probably still on lockdown with the pandemic, and fortunately, Jack wound up being okay. So everyone had a sigh of relief, and they could just sit back and enjoy some. I always say Virgin River's like mac and cheese. It's like comfort food, it's wholesome. It's happy.
Hmm.
It's sad, but it's drama, but it's not too much. It's not. It's just good TV.
It is. It's very good TV.
So, all right. Well, let's get started.
Season 3, episode 2, Sticky Feet.
Okay. Description says Ricky and Lizzie struggle to find privacy. Yeah. After getting caught in your boxers. Good luck with that.
Exactly.
Good luck with that, you two. Doc worries about Hope, who may be stuck in a hurricane. And Mel offers Jack an enticing invitation. So as we know, Hope is still stuck in South
Yep.
Carolina because this season, Annette O'Toole couldn't make it to film. So they basically wrote her out but brought her back as best they could in whatever way they could. And she still isn't physically there. She may show up at some point, even if it's not physically. But right now she's still out of town and everyone's worried because of the hurricane. And, the drama, the drama, the drama.
Mhm.
And how we ended the last episode was, of course, Jack and Mel in a nice bath, having a good time, enjoying her birthday, and a fire breaks out, and they barely make it out.
And
Barely.
Jack's new house that he purchased.
Maybe a
up in
month,
flames.
maybe a month and a half.
If that much, my friend.
Barely. Like,
Yeah.
the ink wasn't even dry on the paperwork.
Tell me about it.
Gosh. All right. So here we go. So the episode starts off that his house is basically a shell of what it was. The fire seems to be out. There's a lot of smoke. There's not going to be anything left. I mean, it's gone. It's
just a pile of ash.
Yeah, and that's a fire in that area is actually very dangerous. I mean, we live in California, and I mean, it's pretty sad. We have rainy season and we have wind, and we have fire season, which should not be a season, but it is. And usually October and November, we get serious winds. We call them Santa Ana winds because they come in so strong. We just had this the other night where there was like 40, 50 mile an hour winds. It's howling. I mean, it sounds like thunder. It sounds like the windows are going to break. It's blowing. I live next to a mountain, so we kind of get more of that than someone who lives, say, a mile away. But having a fire in a forest is very dangerous. So fortunately, they got this out really quick because that could have gone wrong real fast. So fortunately, they were able to take care of it, and it's just a shame that it's gone. And Jack and Mel are just... Doc is there. He's taking care of the firemen. And Bert is there with his wife. And Jack is just sort of dumbfounded. Now, Mel ran out in a robe. Her car was parked near the house. I don't think he has a driveway. Or maybe they moved the cars. I don't know. But she must have had clothes in her car. Probably, because she has clothes on now instead of just a robe. He's still wearing his shirt and his dress pants that he showed up looking so dapper when he was convincing her to come to his house for a surprise. They both had those fireman blankets that they give you. At least it wasn't those tinfoil ones, which are so attractive. He's just looking like heartbroken.
He is just besides himself. He is, and you can tell he's in shock. He's
Oh yeah,
just basic.
totally shocked. Yeah, he just is like, I don't even believe. Thank God it wasn't the bar. Honestly, like, I mean,
Oh
if you
God, if
have to
that,
choose between the two, he would be like, take my house.
yeah, I agree.
So Mel's trying to be very supportive and consoling, and she's like, the fire chief said there's nothing more we can do,
Right.
and he's like, yeah,
I think with everything that's happened to him, he is just
like he
overwhelmed.
cannot take anything else. Like
Mhm.
seriously, how much more can life pile on this poor man? So Mel says that because Bree was staying at the bar. Remember, that's where he was staying, but then he got the house, so he moved to the house. And
Mhm.
Mel's like, well, Bree will stay at the Fitches at the B&B if he wants to go back to his room at the bar. Like she's fine.
Right.
She's like, I'll go. And he's just like, she's like, but you can stay with me if you want. And he's like, oh, I don't feel so good. And he goes over to the other side of his truck and basically loses his lunch. And Doc
Mhm.
comes up talking to Mel, and he's like, hey, Doc says the adrenaline's making him nauseous. And she's like, yeah, I know, I got to get him out of here. And Doc reminds Mel that he might be dealing with triggers from Iraq, like stress and just the everything. And she's like, I know. And Doc's like, oh, God, I'm so sorry. This must be rough on both of you.
Yeah.
And Jack's like, let's go. I got to get out of here. Got to get out of here. They decide to go ahead and leave, and they're going to head to her cabin. I mean, where else are they going to go? Bert is like, is he okay? And Doc's like, I honestly don't know. And Doc's like, a man can only take so much before he breaks, which is like, at what point? Like, he has been bending and bending and bending, and at what point is he going to break? Then they look back at the house, and it's basically collapsed at this point. There's
Oh yeah.
nothing. There's no.
It's ash, as I said.
When
It's ash.
you first saw it, you could see the front. You could the part on the left, that side
Mhm.
structure, whatever that was, whether it was rooms or garage or whatever, was sort of like barely held together, and then the front you could still see, but then they look back now, it's been a little while, and now it's gone, everything is gone, it's just a pile of ashes. So they go back
Mhm.
to the cabin, and hopefully she didn't bring much with her, because that would have been burnt up too.
Yeah. Well, I think that was just a birthday visit, so I doubt she had much there to
Yeah,
begin with.
and she probably got dressed and then her clothes got burnt, but other than
Yeah.
that, I mean, it's not like her cabin with everything she has. So she asks him if
Right.
he wants something to eat, and he's like, no thanks. She's like, are you sure? And he just sits down at her table and like puts his hands together, and like she gives him a glass of water, and he's just like contemplating life.
Yeah.
And she sits down with him, and she's like, you don't have to put on a brave face. I mean, especially with her.
She's telling him, "You lost everything. This is a big deal."
Yeah. And it's okay to feel that. Like, he's like, yeah, but you know him, Mr. Strong, Mr. I can handle anything. I've handled everything this far, and I may suck at it, but I'm going to handle it. He's like, there's no point getting worked up about it, is there? Like, he just sits back in his chair. He's like, it's not going to change anything. And she's
Mm,
like, yeah, but it's okay to feel what you're feeling. He's like, yeah, I feel like it's been one thing after another. And she's like, yeah, you have been through a lot. And he's like, well, so have you. Like, he never will be like, my pain is bigger than your pain, or I'm going to one up you. Like, it's never like,
yeah.
he
That's
acknowledges.
yeah. He's not gonna be. He's not that type of person.
No, no. And he acknowledges, well, considering what she's been through, what he's been through is nothing. Like, he's
Right.
probably even thinking that. Like, I just lost my house. Like, you lost your husband, your baby, your parents. That's so much more than just a house. It's just stuff. Like, he's okay. She's okay. They
Yeah.
survived the fire. So, technically, it's just stuff. Yeah, it sucks, but it's just stuff.
Yeah. It's things that can be replaced. It's not like a life.
But he
You know.
acknowledges, you've been through stuff. And she's like, yeah, and you let me cry and yell. And she laughs a little bit. She goes, and then cries some more. And he's like, yeah, but getting emotional, it doesn't really work for him. So he's like, I just end up breaking things. And she's like, yeah, well, you're welcome to break whatever you want. Just maybe do it at the bar because she doesn't have renter's insurance. Like trying to be funny, trying to find a little levity. And he's like, yeah, okay, well, I'll remember that next time I feel like smashing stuff. She's like, hey, as he gets up and he walks toward the bathroom. And she's like, I'm here for you, whatever, whatever you need. And he's like, yeah, I know. Thanks. He's like, I'm going to get a shower and maybe try and get some sleep. And he walks toward the bathroom and she's like, hey, I love you. And he's like, love you too. And he heads to the bathroom. It's like, he just needs a minute.
Yeah, he needs just to not be around people.
Yeah, it's a lot.
And as much as he loves her, this is something he's gonna have to
He's
work
got
out
a
himself.
lot of internal stuff happening. So here we are. We
Next morning.
are scenery. It's morning. He's outside by that little dock area where the two Adirondack chairs are. And he's on the phone. And he's like, okay, I'll come by tomorrow. Thank you. And she walks up and she was like, hey. And he's like, hey. She goes, that was that the fire investigator. So maybe they can figure out what's going on. He's like, no, it was Joellen. I called to see if she had any vacancies. And Mel's like, oh, okay. Do you not want to stay here? And he's like, no. It's not that. It's just that there's, it's like a studio. There's not a lot of room, first of
Yeah,
all. And she's like, well, I can clear out one of the closets and I'm sure Doc will let me keep stuff at the clinic. And, he's like, no, I don't want you to have to do that. And she's like, oh, it's really not a problem. And he goes, what is that thing that Hope says about guests and
and
fish? I don't want to overstay. And she's like, okay, wait a minute. Now, okay, this was Charmaine we were talking about, and Hope and Charmaine do not get along, so we know where that
yeah,
all came from. She's like, this is
that's right.
completely different. We're in a relationship.
Hmm. But I have to say, I love that saying.
I know. So funny. He's like, well, it doesn't mean that we won't get on each other's nerves. And she's
Hmm.
like, I'm sorry. What do I do that annoys you? And he's like, oh, God, nothing. It's more that I'd be bothering you.
Mm.
He's like, I just don't want you to feel obligated to have me stay here. And she's like, no, but it's been one night. And she's like, okay, I'm not fighting with him on this. Like, I am not going to push him and he's going to do what he's going to do. But she's like, okay, well, you think about it. You let me know. And she's like, I got to go to work. I'll see you later. All right. Because he's got to go to the bar anyway. I mean, life still goes on. The bar
It,
is open, the clinic is open. Now we are at the clinic, and Doc is listening to a weather report saying that the hurricane is still heading toward South Carolina, and the residents of where Hope is staying with her aunt, of that area, they're bracing for landfall later that night. And it's been upgraded. Now it's a category 3. And they're saying that the water surge is going to be like 9 to 12 feet high, 125-mile-an-hour winds. So that's pretty big. And that's exactly where Hope is. So he's kind of freaking out.
yeah, I would freak out too.
So he's on the phone and he's trying to call and he's trying to call and he just keeps getting the automated, like all circuits are busy, blah, blah, blah. Your call's been forwarded, all that. And he can't get through. He just keeps leaving messages. He's already mapped out like where she should go to evacuate. And he was like, this is where you need to go. You and your Aunt Nancy need to get out of there immediately. Take this road, take that road. As soon as you get there, let me know you're safe. Even, as helpless as he feels, he's trying to
To give
help her in a way. So he's giving her all the directions and not that she can even get the call, not that, who even knows how she is.
that's true.
But he's just sitting there freaking out without being able to do anything. I mean,
Well,
they literally just got back together.
yeah, he feels like if he doesn't do anything, he's not being productive.
Yeah.
So he feels he has to do this so
Right.
that he can justify all the craziness happening around him as such.
Yeah.
So,
So Mel shows up and they're like, oh, do you by chance happen to have Mrs. Gardner's file? She's coming in for a well check, which should be interesting. And she's
I
like,
love, I love the women in this town who they're
Speak their
all about
mind. They speak their mind.
they're
Mel
they're a breed amongst themselves.
Well,
Let's put
Mel's
it
trying
that.
to get a cup of coffee, and she's telling Doc the last time that Mrs. Gardner was in, she told her that she should enjoy her figure while she's
As
young
you can. Mm-hmm.
because
Because
someday her metabolism will stop and she won't be able to wear skinny jeans anymore. And
ah,
he's not even engaging in the conversation. And he's like, yeah, her file's in my office.
mm-hmm.
And she's like, okay. And she's like, is everything okay? And she could tell. I mean, he's not himself. This is not the doctor that she knows.
Right.
And he's like, Category 3 hurricane headed straight for Port Royal. And she's like, oh my gosh. She goes, well, were they able to evacuate? And he's like, I have no idea. I can't get a hold of anybody. Maybe the power is out. I mean, and she's like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. She's like, if you need to go home, I can cover. And he goes, well, what am I going to do at home? I'd rather be here and be distracted than to be home. And she's like, well, if you need to go, you let me know. And he's like, oh, it's very kind of you, but, I'll be fine. And then he's like, so how's Jack doing? And she goes, oh, well, yeah, he says he's fine. You know what people mean when they say they're fine. He wants to stay at the B&B instead of staying with me. And Doc's like, well, I mean, it's not unheard of. I mean, Jack's pretty self-reliant. It's a point of pride for him to be in charge of everything in his own life. She's like, yeah, that's definitely true. But, maybe he needs to stand on his own for a minute. Feel like he has some control over his life. Because right now, he doesn't have a whole lot of control. And so she's like, okay, so you're saying I should support him if he wants to stay at the B&B? He goes, I'm not saying anything. I'm just calling it as I see it. And she's like,
I love how he says that. I'm not saying because basically he is not claiming
oh no,
responsibility for anything here.
he doesn't give his opinion. He just speaks, and you can take it however you want it. And she's like, chicken. He goes, oh yeah, chicken with a lot of experience. Good Lord, he's been around Hope for 20 years. So
Tell me, he proceeds everything with caution. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. And then he tells her that Lily stopped by the night before. She was obviously enjoying her birthday, having a bath, avoiding a fire. Lily stopped by and wanted to talk while he was, closing things up. And she didn't say what she wanted, and she's like, is Chloe okay? No, Chloe's fine. It was a lady thing. And she's like, a lady thing. And he's like, yeah. She's like, are you sure you're not a character from, like, Outlander? And he's like, oh, ha, ha, very funny. Yeah. So then Mrs. Gardner shows up, and she's like, hi, sorry I'm early. And Doc's like, good morning, Virginia. And Mel's like, just have a seat. I'll be there in a minute.
Lady thing.
Yeah, I know. So she's like, all right, well, I'm going to go grab the file and get started. And Doc is just, then the phone rings. And he's like, oh, could this be Hope? And he's like, hello? And it's Julia. Remember Julia, the headhunter?
Yes.
Trying to help him find a replacement or an assistant doctor or something.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like disappointed because it's not Hope. It's not someone telling him how Hope is.
Yeah.
And he's like, oh, hi, how are you? And she's strolling through town and she's like, good. I have 2 promising candidates coming to meet with you today. And he's like, oh, that's really, really good. And she's like, will there be anyone else in the interview? And he was like, who? And she's like, your nurse, It can be helpful to have a different perspective in the room. And he's like, hey, I already told you that this is to remain confidential. And she was under the impression that meant, like, don't tell anybody in the town. Like, don't put it on, in the newspaper or something, an advertisement that he's looking for help or replacement. But he meant, like, don't tell anybody, like, not even Mel.
Yeah.
And she's like, really? She goes, well, when it comes to small businesses, usually new hires are transparent. And he's like, well, I run my clinic on a need-to-know basis. And right now, nobody else needs to know.
And the thing about it is, he doesn't understand this is going to come back and bite him in the ass.
Of course it will. Of course it will. But he doesn't get that yet. And
Nope.
Julia's like, yeah, but you'd want to like know if there's a personality issue or something like that. You know, before
Mm-hmm.
you bring somebody in, and in her experience, when employees are blindsided, it can cause a headache for management. He's like, hey, well, this management is gonna, this is my plan and this is what I'm doing, and you have yourself a nice day. And she's like, okay. Doc's gonna do what Doc wants to do the way Doc wants to do it.
As he always does. He always.
Exactly. So now we are at Ricky and Liddy's house, and Ricky and Lizzie are sitting on the couch, and she's got her legs across his lap, and they're both on their phones, which is so typical of teenagers. They don't even
Mm-hmm.
talk to each other. They just sit all together and they're on their phones
On the phones.
individually, sending each other memes and sending each other stuff all in the same
And
rooms.
I don't understand that.
I don't know either.
I don't understand that. But apparently, this is the way this generation communicates.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. So
But
Liddy's so cute. She walks in and she's putting like her hands up next to her eyes, like so she's not really looking at them. So she creates like a tunnel vision. And she's like, "Oh, don't mind me." She's like, Grandma, you don't need to cover your eyes." She goes, "Oh, I don't want to invade your privacy." And Lizzie's like, "Yeah, what privacy?" She goes, "Well, I made some shortbread for you this morning." And she comes out with a plate of cookies, hands it to Lizzie. And she's like, "Oh, that was really nice of you." He goes, "Okay, I'm going to go back to my room. Call me if you need anything." And Lizzie's like, "Okay." And she starts rubbing his leg with her foot. And he goes in for a kiss. And then Liddy comes back out again. She's like, "Oh, well, you can't have cookies without milk." And he's like, "Isn't she great?" And Lizzie just is like, "Oh, good Lord." She comes back with 2 glasses of milk. She goes, "Here you go. One for you and one for you. And now, is there anything else I can get you?" And Ricky's like, "Oh, can I have a napkin?" "Oh, of course, dear." And Lizzie is looking at him like, "What is wrong with you?" And he's like, "What?" And she's like, "A napkin? Really?" And she puts her milk
again,
down and she's like so over him. She's like,
yeah,
"Oh, here you are, dear." He goes, "Now I'll get out of your hair." And she scurries away.
as usual, a guy who is oblivious to his
And
surroundings.
he's like, "What do you have against napkins?" And she's like, "Dude, like, for real." She's like, "Don't you want to be alone with me?" He goes, "Well, we are alone." She goes, "We aren't. Your grandma might as well be sitting between us." And he's like, "Well, if this is her house." And she's like, "Exactly. So if you ever want to have sex again, you better find somewhere we can be alone." And she grabs her shoes and heads for the door. And he's like shocked, like, "What? I don't understand. I can't imagine what the problem could be." Like, really? So now we're back at Jack's bar, and Jack is helping serve food. He's coming out from the kitchen. He's got a couple plates of food. And we see Bree, who's been staying upstairs, his sister, who just came to town while he was in the hospital after being shot. And she's got her earbuds in, and she's dressed for running. And he's like, "Hey," and she's like, "I tried to call you last night." And he's like, "Yeah, sorry, I wasn't up for chatting." And she's like, "Are you okay?" He goes, "Yeah, I'm fine. The house is gone, but that's what insurance is for, right?" And she's like, "You need to play the lottery." It's like, "Why?" It's like, "Because the universe owes you." And she's like, "Well, are you staying with Mel?" And he's like, "Yeah, for now." He's like, "I got to decide if I want to move in with her or stay at the Fitches, or I don't know." She's like, "Why would you want to stay at the B&B?" He's like, "Well, I don't want her to feel overwhelmed. I mean, she's got enough on her plate." It's like, "Well, what does she want you to do?" He's like, "Well, of course, Mel wants him to stay with her. I mean, what else?" He's like, "Well, what else is she going to say?" And Bree, she's a lawyer, okay? I don't know that we know that yet, but she's a lawyer. I think, yeah, because they did mention while she was in law school and while she's been working, she works 80 hours a week, and all of a sudden she's acting like she's on spring break. So we know she's a lawyer, and so she can probably read people pretty well. And she says, "I don't know her that well, but she seems pretty direct."
Yep.
And he's like, "Well, yeah, she is, but she's also compassionate, and she could be offering for me to stay there out of sympathy." She's like, "I don't think that's the case. But if you're uncomfortable, move back. He's like, wait a minute. Aren't you supposed to be going home? Isn't mom like wondering where you are? She's like, yeah, I actually decided to take some extra personal time. And he's like, your boss is okay with that? She's like, oh, don't worry about me. She gives him a nice big hug. And she says, you take care of yourself. And as she's heading out the door to go run, she says hi to Mel. Mel says, hey. And then she walks up to the bar and she's like, hi. He's like, you don't have to check up on me. She's like, I'm just getting some lunch. Like, yeah. And he's like, oh, really? She's like, yeah. He's like, it's not even noon. She's like, yeah, I know. And I'm like, already starving. And he's like, mm-hmm. And she's like, what? She goes, did you know that it's a known fact that stress triggers hormones related to appetite?
I love how she says that.
And that's why they call it stress eating. He's like, oh, so this is about your stress from last night, not mine. And she's like, correct. He's like, if you hadn't been a nurse, you'd be a great attorney. She's like, thanks. So she asks if there's any news on the house, because hopefully he heard something, because, oof. And he's like, yeah, faulty wiring in the attic caused the fire. And I love this because this is exactly what I was thinking. She's like, well, that's good news that it wasn't set intentionally. And he's like, oh, wow. So you're setting the bar for good news pretty low. And she's like, well, yeah, it increases the amount of good news in the world. He's like, okay. I mean, think about it. It could have been intentionally set, because how many people are pissed at him and somebody shot him, so he clearly...
Well, exactly. And that's the thing. That's what I thought when it got set. I thought it was Calvin and the guys.
I did too. Or Brady, or it could be Charmaine. I mean, who knows? Maybe, easily could have been Charmaine saw the two of them in the bathtub and decided, I'm not having that. If you can't have him, no one can have him. Not that she would do that, but, depends. Woman scorned. You never know.
That's true, but my first suspicion...
Mine was too, that it was Calvin. Absolutely. So Preacher arrives, and he's like, hey, Mel, and he goes, oh, sorry I'm late. Connie came by to help, because remember, Connie has said from the beginning, I want to help, I want to be a part of this, figuring out this thing with Christopher and Paige, and now that he has Christopher, Connie has literally jumped in to help in any way, shape, or form that she can.
Yep.
So Connie came by to help him, and after she cleaned up the kitchen, he couldn't find his keys. It took him a half an hour. Jack's like, her heart is in the right place, and Mel's like, yeah, just not your keys. And they all laugh at that. They're like, oh, that's good.
Well, as you like to tell your husband, if you put your keys in the same place all the time,
I say that to my children too. If you put things away, it's amazing how you can find them. Go figure. So he offers to bring her lunch over to her, and she places an order, and he's like, all right, I'll bring it over later. And so she hops up, and she's like, are you coming over tonight? And he's like, yeah, I'll bring dinner. And she's like, okay, I'll see you then. So at least she knows she's got him for that night, but he hasn't committed to staying there yet.
That's true.
He's still waffling between, should I stay at the B&B? Should I stay with Mel? He's got a lot going on in his head. So
that's true.
So now we see Mike, and he goes, hey man, I heard about the fire, how you doing? And Jack, he's like, sick and tired of people asking me how I'm doing. He goes into the office, and Mike follows him, and he was like, ugh, you've never been a good patient, even when you had a 6-inch hole in your back. 2 days later.
Well, so that hole in the back matches the hole in the front now.
Yeah. He's got a teeny hole in the front and a very large hole in the back. And he's like, 2 days later, you were like, let me get back to my unit. And he's like, yeah, I hate being down and out. You know that. And Mike's like, yeah, I get that, dude. But, and he goes, well, I did find something that might cheer you up. And he's like, oh, like, I need some good news, right? Like, seriously. He's like, I found a lead on Jimmy's location. You know, little Jiminy Cricket, the little guy who swarms around Calvin?
Waving a gun, like, because he's got to make up for his size.
Yeah. He's like, I'm on my way over to speak to the sheriff and figure that out. And he's like, all right. And he goes, man, I feel bad. Like, you got to be missing the action back in LA. And Mike's like, you know what? I'm actually digging Virgin River. Like, he's been there a minute. Now, I don't know if he's been there since Jack got shot. I feel like he has.
I think
Because,
he has. He
yeah.
came when Jack got shot.
Yeah.
I
And then
think
he stayed because now there's a shooting and he's there to help the sheriff with his expertise being a, LA detective. He can help them figure out what happened. And Jack's like,
Yep.
really? And Mike's like, well, yeah. He goes, Jack's like, I never pictured you as a small town guy. And Mike's like, I really like the vibe.
Yeah,
He's
no
like,
traffic.
yeah, like today. He's like, today, I'm not sitting in traffic before work. You know what I did? I went fishing. He's like, right? And he goes, did you catch any? He goes, yeah, that's not the point. That is not the point.
Point is to relax.
Yeah. He's like, the fish got to get used to me. He's like, yeah, you keep trying. And they just laugh, which Jack needed a laugh. So, later, brother. Thank you, man. Like, they're like brothers. Him and Preacher. Like, the three of them are really, really close. A lot of the other guys that came for that guys week, they're really close too, but I think Mike and Preacher and Jack have like this special bond with the three of them.
So off they go. So here we are now, Connie's Corner Store. I love this store. Can I tell you I love this store?
Well, these little cute little country stores are just, they have so much cute stuff and they're just, I know, I love them too.
And we see Lily coming out with the baby.
Yep, Chloe.
in a stroller, and apparently Chloe's a bit upset, so Lily is trying to calm her, but Lily doesn't look good.
No, she doesn't. She looks unsteady. She looks like she's not feeling well.
She
actually has to like grab the chair to brace herself and then decides probably better to sit down before I fall down. And she's like, oh, it's good girl. And she's just like deep breathing and Chloe's crying, but she's like not looking so good. Taking a deep breath and shaking the stroller, and out comes her daughter. And she's like, Mom, what are you doing? I thought you wanted to shop. And she's like, oh, I just needed some fresh air. And she's like, okay, well, if you're sure you're okay, you look tired. She's like, oh, I'm just getting old. She goes, I don't have the energy I had when you were little. Because you figure her daughter's like mid-20s. Early 20s probably, and that she's got other children. She has other daughters.
Yeah, she's got.
We meet
I think
Ava later, and I think there might be more.
Yeah, I think she has 3 or 4 children. I thought she. So and I'm thinking she's the youngest of the 4.
That's what I think too. I definitely think, and I think Ava, who we meet later, I think she might be the oldest.
All right. So
possibly.
Basically, the age difference between her youngest and her newborn is 20-something years.
Oh, yeah. Basically. Easily 22 years, probably. Because you figure she's probably out of college and, possibly, or the very end stages of college. But she's definitely, I would say, early to mid-20s at best.
Yeah.
And so she's like, oh, Mom, you're not old. She goes, oh, sometimes I feel like I'm 100. And she goes, because you do too much. You take care of me. You take care of Chloe.
She's like, I can do my laundry.
I'm grown up. And she goes, I like doing things for you. She's like, oh, if you're anything like Grandma Fran, you'll be playing with Chloe's grandkids. Because, Lily is not that old. I believe that her character's supposed to be in her mid to late 50s.
Yeah, because I'm thinking like most of the people in this town who are married, they got married very young.
Right.
So, they left high school and got married out of high school in their college,
Because if she's, had kids at 25 and her oldest is, say, 30, that would put her at right around 50, 55. Even if she got married younger than 25, 22, 20 even.
Yeah.
Her and Buck, I don't remember how long they said they were together, and that may come out later. But I know they were married for a very long time. And he just died suddenly. It was sudden and out of nowhere. And he was probably way younger than he should have been. You know, he should have probably lived longer, but for whatever reason,
Mm-hmm.
he died suddenly.
Yep.
And so Lily's like, when she says, you'll be playing with Chloe's grandkids. And Lily's like, wouldn't that be something? But the
And
look on her face is like,
yeah.
I don't think she believes that.
She has that distant look on her face.
Yeah. So here we are back at the clinic, and Doc is interviewing potential partners, someone to take over, someone to help at the clinic. Regardless, he's interviewing doctors.
Mm-hmm.
So he's looking over the guy's resume. It's a guy in a suit. And he's like, okay, first in your class, University of Washington, terrific school. You've been practicing family medicine in San Francisco. Here's the second guy. And he's like, and currently you live in Grace Valley. It's back to the first guy. He goes, so you'd be willing to move to Virgin River? And he goes, oh, no, I'd commute. And Doc's like, and the second guy's like, aside from your nurse practitioner, how many medical assistants do you have? And Doc's like, none. And the guy's like, if you live 2 hours away, how would you handle aftercare to the first guy? And he's like, oh,
I'd send them to urgent care in Clear River.
And he's like, oh, you would you?
And
he goes, well, you guessed wrong. Because that's not the answer that he wants to hear.
Well, the thing is, this is a small town.
You need to live there. You need to live there.
You can't be 2 hours away and then send people to Clear River, because that's another hour and a half or whatever it is, 2 hours to get there.
It defeats the purpose of why he's hiring someone.
Exactly.
Like if he just wanted to tell people, he wouldn't need to hire anybody, because he could just tell everybody to go to Clear River.
Exactly. And that's an hour away, which doesn't do anybody there any good when they help now.
No. So we are back at Emerald Lumber. And Jeb,
joy.
Now remember Jeb, his wife and daughter had the poisoning from the water supply from Emerald Lumber from the pot camp. And almost, they had to be rushed to the hospital by Doc and Mel. And now Jeb works there. So he's got his hat on. By the way, his hat is on backwards. It bugged me when I saw it.
I know.
It's like, do you not realize your hat's on backwards, dude? Like, the brim is supposed to cover your eyes, and the emblem
I'm surprised nobody caught that.
Yeah, I catch this kind of stuff.
No, sorry. That I caught that one. There are things I didn't catch that you pointed out, but that one I saw, and I was like, I saw that. I'm going, why is his hat on backwards? He looks so funky looking.
It's not like a baseball hat where you could wear it either. You could wear it sideways if you want, and it's fine. But this is like, it's a hard hat. It's meant to do something specific. Protect your eyes, protect your head, whatever. Anyway, so he's talking to Brady, and he's telling him that the hydraulic hose on a Feller, Buncher, whatever that is, ruptured. So some piece of equipment isn't working. Let's just go with that. Because I don't know anything about that stuff. And Brady's in the middle of, like, looking at the engine of one of the trucks. And he just is like, oh my gosh. He's like,
another problem.
Yeah. And Jeb's like, and Jeb and Brady are friends. They've been friends for a long time. We don't actually know that, but I'm telling you, that's the truth. We find out later, but, their relationship is very friendly. And I think he helped Jeb get the job, even though he didn't want him to work there because he has a family and he knows what kind of shady stuff's going on there. But, and Jeb's a nice guy, and he cares about Brady, and he's like, dude, is everything all right? And he's like, yeah, Bud nearly lost his hand. And they're like, oh, man. And Brady's like, so what's the damage? And apparently this piece of equipment that they need to fix or replace or whatever is going to cost like $50,000. And Brady's like, we don't have that. And he goes, how much to repair the one that we do have? And Jeb's like, well, we need a heavy vehicle mechanic, and a good one, is about, I don't know, $40 an hour. And Brady's like, okay, find somebody willing to charge a flat rate. And Jeb's like, dude, those guys do not grow on trees. That's going to be hard. And he was like, well, and he's like, okay, I'll figure it out. And he's like, Brady's like, look, let's keep this between ourselves right now. Because if the guys start thinking that the company is in trouble, they're going to leave. They're going to bolt. And then
they're going to bail on him.
Yeah, we're going to fold. And it's not going to be good because Calvin's in charge and he's not going to like that. Jeb's like, all right, okay.
Poor Brady. It's just like
one thing after another. Him too.
Yeah, he's hanging on by a hope and a prayer with this business. Let me tell you.
So we're back at the clinic, and Muriel is showing up. She's walking up the steps as Doc is escorting a gentleman out the door. One of his interviews, and he's like, "Oh, follow that road, and it'll take you right back to the main highway." And Muriel's looking at Doc and looking at the guy and looking at Doc and looking at the guy. And he's like, okay, well, thanks, and let me know if you change your mind about those references. He's trying to hide it, obviously.
Exactly.
Because we know how this town is.
Yeah, and he's not doing such a good job because the guy just blew his cover by saying about the references.
Right, now he's going to try and be slick. And Muriel's like, hey, and he's like, hey, and she's like, who was that? Because you know she's not going to let that go.
Oh, yeah.
No, please. No, she's not going to let that go. He's, just some tourist asking about references. Oh, I thought he said preferences. And she's like, preferences for what? And he's like, well, your guess is as good as mine. Would you like some coffee? She's like, oh, yes, sure, I'd love it. Like anything to spend time with him. Because, she's there to support him in Hope's absence. And she's like, oh, I brought you this. And he's like, oh. Is that jam? And she's like, yeah, strawberry. She goes, thank you. I hope you didn't go to too much trouble on my account. And she's like, oh, no, not at all. So they're sitting down together at the little table in the kitchen, having some coffee. And she's like, have you heard from Hope? And he's like, no. I mean, he's like really stressed about it. And she's like, anything in the news? And he's like, well, the weather have made it impossible for them to evacuate. Her aunt, she's almost 90 and in a wheelchair, which makes it really, really complicated. And Hope would never leave her behind. So, because the island is very exposed, the storm surge and then the flooding, I mean, all of that.
Yeah.
All that. And she's like, listen, if I had to bet my money on someone to survive a natural disaster, I'd bet on Hope. Ida, which is the name of the storm, has no idea what she's up against. I mean, Hope is a force of nature herself.
Oh, she's
her own special flavor of tornado, right?
Yeah.
And so
on her own.
In order to distract him, she's like, why don't we have a game of backgammon to distract you? It's like very nice of her to do that. And he was like, well, I suppose I do have some time before my next appointment. She's like, excellent. So he's like, Set's in my office. I'll be right back. And she's like, great. I'll clear the area. So she's moving things around. And she sees a folder on the counter, which she should not be looking at.
Nope.
But she opens the folder and looks at it. And then he's like,
Yeah.
I'm not so sure I can focus.
And that's a folder probably of the person who he just interviewed.
Exactly. So he's going to try to focus, and she's going to try to distract him, and they just kind of laugh about it.
Mm-hmm.
And she knows. She's like, I'm not going to ask it. I'm putting that in my back pocket. I'm going to stick a pin in that for later. I'm going to remember what I saw. She's going to hold on to that little nugget for now.
Yep.
Deal with that later. Mel has gone to town. Probably Clear River or wherever, and
it's Clear River because it's not
Virgin River does not have shops.
No, well, no, they don't.
And she's looking at some flowers and she's smelling some herbs, and Bree happens to walk up behind her as she's arriving in town to do some shopping, and she's like, "Oh, Mel," and she's like, "Oh, Bree, hey." And they hug each other, and it's just so cute because they're such besties now that they're besties on the show, which I just think is adorable. I just think they're so cute together, just off camera, like in their podcasts and all, all the things that they get themselves into. So it's just really cute that they have each other on the show too. I mean, that's a lot of time to spend together, but it worked out for
Well,
them.
when you find your person,
Yeah, exactly.
It's never enough time,
I
and
know. You always have things to talk about. You always, it's like
always silly nonsense.
time is irrelevant.
Exactly. I mean, you and I have been doing this for how many
Oh
years?
my gosh. We met in what, 1999? Almost 25 years.
Exactly. So, and we talk pretty often.
We talk almost every day except weekends. Because you're busy,
Exactly.
I'm busy. I got the family and the husband and the whatever. But we talk
Exactly.
nearly every morning, Monday through
Exactly.
Friday. And sometimes
Right.
weekends. And then we send each other memes and pictures and all kinds of crap in the middle of the night and middle of the day and just things that are funny and whatever. So
Yeah. So when you find your person, they're
it's all
there.
good. It's all good.
It's all meant to be.
Exactly. So they're asking each other like, what are you doing in Clear River? And Mel's like, I'm picking up some clothes for Jack. And Bree's like, oh, yeah, so am I. And the two of them are like, oh. And she's like, Mel's like, I felt like I was drowning in a sea of plaid. And she goes, well, you obviously know my brother. And Bree's like, I think he came out of the womb wearing a button-down flannel. And Mel's like, I can picture that. And I love Bree. She's like a little firecracker. She's really smart. She's very witty, and her comebacks are great. I just love her. She's like one of
Yeah.
my favorite characters. I think she's great. So she's like, hey, there's a nail salon just down the street I was going to try out. Do you want to come? Kind of like hoping. And Mel's like, Doc said I have some time, so yeah. And she goes, well, there's no reason not to go. So they head down, and they're walking, and
it's a cute little town.
oh, it's adorable. And this is a real place. You can actually go and walk the same path that they're walking in front of the same shops and visit all the same places that they filmed because it's a real place and it's in Vancouver or in that surrounding area. So Mel asked Bree, how often do you visit Jack? And Bree is like, well, I haven't actually seen him for about a year and a half. And the last time she came visiting was to see a friend of hers from college that had moved to Garberville, which is another town over.
Mm-hmm.
And she's
which is 2 hours away.
Right. And Mel's like, oh, where did you go to college? And she's like, oh, I went to Chapman for undergrad. And Mel's like, stop. And she's like, are you serious? And Bree's like, yeah. And she goes, I went to Chapman. And she's like, no way. She's like, yeah. She goes, I never met anyone who went there. She's like, most people haven't even heard of it. And she's like, I know. I can't believe this. She goes, when did you graduate? She's like, 2007. She goes, we were there at the same time. Okay, so age-wise, this was 2021. So 2007, she was about 22. So you add 14 years. Am I doing my math right? 7 to 21 is 14 years to 22, which puts her at 36, 35, Bree?
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
I think Mel is slightly older, maybe a year or two, which puts Mel, which we originally had, I think the books have her at 38, 37. I know that Alex Breckenridge started the show when she was like 37 or 38. So I think it's actually true. I know in the book they have her like much younger. They have her like 10, 15 years younger than Jack. But in reality, I think their characters are only maybe 8 years, 7 years apart. Because I think they have him at like 45. And her character was supposed to be like 37. And remember, we've only gone through 4 months, 5 months.
I know.
6. Well, now that we've established that they were at the Mingle in January, and it's now summer because Mel's birthday was June, and then 3 weeks later, after he gets shot, puts us in July, August. So technically, it's been 8 months, 7 months that she's been in town.
It's just way too long,
right? So they're just shocked that they went to the same college. And Mel asked Bree, what was your major? And she's like, political science. And Mel's like, oh, health sciences, opposite sides of the campus. Bree's like, still, I'm sure we crossed paths. And she's like, oh, God, I'm sure we were there at the same time. What a small world. Now, I'm going to throw something out there. It is a small world because I don't know if the writer of the books, because this is actually what is said in the books, that they went to Chapman University. And remember when Hope was trying to talk Doc into hiring Mel and said that she went to UCI? Well, all of that is like within a half an hour of me. Like she lives in LA. She lived in LA. That's like an hour away. Hope said that she went to UCI, which is literally down the street. It's like 10 or 15 minutes away. And Chapman University is like less than 20, 30 minutes away. So I wonder how or why or if Robin Carr, who wrote the books, has some connection to Southern California. Clearly she has a connection to California, being Virgin River is in the Pacific Northwest of California. But interesting that a lot of where she chose very specific locations, like Chapman College is not a popular name. Like people don't know that. You know, hear of USC, UCLA, UCSB, University of California, Santa Barbara.
It's a small college.
Yeah.
And unless you're going there for a specific reason, you live close by, that's the only way you would know about it.
Exactly. So I think it's interesting that she picked very specific places in Southern California. And it's just funny that I live right here. Like I'm right down the street, which is interesting. Because when they said Chapman College, I'm like, I know where that is. They're like, UCI, I know where that is. Like I pass by it all the time. Yeah. So anyway, I just thought that was very interesting. That clearly Robin Carr has connections with more than just Southern California, like very specific locations. I didn't look it up. I don't know where she went to school. Maybe she went there. Maybe that's why she picked it. I don't know. But anyway.
She lives in Southern California, and so it's
no, she lives in Las Vegas, actually.
Oh, that's right. I forgot about that.
She lives in Las Vegas. I don't know. Maybe she used to. Maybe she used to live down here. I don't know. But anyway, little tidbit. So the two of them are just going to enjoy Clear River the afternoon, get their nails done, maybe get some coffee. And now we're in this beautiful park. I love how the bakery truck,
I know,
Paige's Bakeaway, that's what she calls it, it's mobile. She pulls it behind her vehicle and parks it wherever she needs to park it. And right now she's in this beautiful open park with a little path and a nice open green spot right next to a lake with the mountains in the background. I mean, seriously.
Well, she always, when the thing about it is, it's always parked in like 3 specific spots.
Yeah, and this is definitely one of them.
This is one of them, and so it's always a nice environment too.
Absolutely.
Could you imagine us having our coffee there?
I would die to have my coffee there. I want to have my coffee there. I'm going to get coffee and I'm going to find a beautiful location as many times as possible while I visit Vancouver to enjoy my coffee. At the bakery truck, Ricky walks up, giving a nice smile.
He's got a smug look on his face.
I know, like he's got a plan.
He's got a plan.
And Lizzie's like, "Hi." And he's like, "I have a surprise for you." And she's like, "Oh, if you brought me lunch, I already ate." He's like, "It's not lunch." She's like, "Then what is it?" He goes, "If I tell you, then it won't be a surprise anymore." And he's just smiling like, "I got a secret."
Just a cat.
And she's like, "Okay, then why are you telling me now?" And he's like, "Well, you need to tell Connie that you're spending the night at a friend's." And she's like,
realize she had friends.
She doesn't really have any friends. I mean, she's not in school, so I don't know. Maybe she has a friend. Who knows? Maybe she'll make up a friend, whatever. And she's like, "Why would I do that?" And he's like, "Because I'm going to take you somewhere." And she's like, "Oh, somewhere not in Virgin River?" And he's like, "Correct." She's like, "Oh, okay. And what should I wear?" He's like, "Just normal clothes." He's like, "Well, I need a jacket, a sleeping bag." He's like, "No." "Will there be candy?" "Well, there can be if you want, because this girl has a sweet tooth to die for."
No, she does.
Always with the candy. She's like,
well, you have coffee, she has candy. What can I
exactly.
tell you?
She's like, do I need pajamas? And he's like, no. She's like, oh, now who's got the smile on their face now? She's like, okay. She goes, now I'm intrigued. He goes, good. That's what I was going for. So he just made her day.
Mm-hmm.
Back at Clear River, and Bree and Mel have now finished their little manicure. And Bree's like, oh, I can't believe how ragged my nails were. And Mel's like, oh, I know, me too.
So they're walking down the street.
And they're admiring the color that they have chosen. And Mel picked Put It in Neutral, which is a cute name. And Bree wound up going with Red Hot Rio.
Rio.
And Mel's like, bold. And Bree's like, you know what else we should try? And Mel's like, She goes, Temper. It's a pastry. She goes, they have this milk chocolate salted caramel cake. And Mel's like, oh, stop. And so they stop outside of this little shop, and then Mel's on one side of the door looking at something on a sale rack, and Bree's on the other side of the door looking at scarves or whatever. And she's like, what do you think? And she goes, cute. It goes with your nails, because Bree is showing her something. And just as somebody walks out the door, like sort of unexpectedly, Bree didn't see him coming, he brushes by her and she freaks out. Like, freaks out to the point that she nearly knocks over the stand and fixes the thing. And she's trying to, like, blow it off like it was nothing. And Mel's like, are you okay? And she's like, yeah, I'm fine. She's like, let me help you. She goes, no, I got it. I'm good. And I'm like, okay, that's not a normal reaction.
Yeah.
That is not a Now, we know that there's something brewing because...
Yeah. After that conversation she had on the phone at the bar.
Right. The fact that, I mean, let's put the clues together. She dropped everything and came to check on Jack. And she was there the entire, probably 3 weeks he was in the hospital. Mm-hmm. Okay, so she's left her job. And then the second time we see her, Jack's now back at work. And she's on the phone telling someone to throw out her stuff, that she doesn't want them and she doesn't care what they do with them. So that looks like a bad breakup.
Mm-hmm.
And now we see her being very jumpy.
Yep.
Now,
and it's because it's a man who freaked her out.
Right. If it was a woman, I don't believe she would have jumped.
No, I don't think so either.
But it was a man. So, I mean, my brain goes to domestic violence.
You're right.
Something like that. Like, that's not a normal breakup reaction. That's a traumatic experience kind of reaction.
Yeah, that's putting your defenses on high alert.
Right. And remember, every character in this show gets a very rich backstory that they sprinkle their life information as we progress. So right now we're just getting bits and pieces.
And we're getting to know her slowly but surely.
Right. And they don't throw it all at you. They don't give you all of it at once. They don't wait until, 6 months down the road that we hear it's like they just sprinkle enough to start building her backstory.
They wet your whistle.
Yeah.
Is what they're doing. They wet your whistle. And so basically we're getting little snippets of Bree's lives.
Right. And the fact that now she's taken an extended vacation, more personal time off, she clearly doesn't want to go back. And
I would say she's on sabbatical.
And she's not calling it that. She's saying extended personal time. So that makes me believe that whatever's going on has obviously something to do with where she works. Whether she works with someone, it could be a coworker, a boss, something at the firm or wherever her place of employment. Something's not right.
Something's afoot.
And I'm sure we will all find out. So now we are with Ricky and Lizzie, and they have just pulled up to Sam's Cottage Inn. And Lizzie's very excited. He's very excited. It's like a cute little log cabin type inn in the woods. And she's like, oh my gosh, it's so romantic. And she gives him a big hug. And he's like, you like it? She's like, yeah.
It's
So
called Cottage Inn.
Yep, Sam's Cottage Inn. So as they hold hands, walk in the door, they go up to the counter and ring the bell. And the guy comes to the counter and they're like, oh, can I help you? Are you accompanied by an adult? It's like, he's like, no, we're both 18. Well, actually, she's 19. So, and he's just looking at her, looking at him, looking at her with this look on his face like, oh, God. I'm going to need to see both your IDs. And they're like, okay. They pull out IDs, checking, looking at his, holding the ID up to Ricky, like looking at the picture on the ID and looking at him to like compare.
It's so pathetic, it's not funny.
I know. And he's like, so when will you be checking out? And he's like, tomorrow. And he's like, luggage? And they're like, no, I'll be right back. It's like so uncomfortable. I don't know who it's more uncomfortable for, the guy or the kids. And Ricky, of course, because he is such a worrywart and he's Mr. Rule Follower, he's like, I think he thinks we're going to have sex. And Lizzie's like, we are going to have sex. And they're just like looking at each other, smiling. And he's like, okay, 2 double beds. And Lizzie's like, we'd like a king, please. And the guy's like, okay, fine. I'm going to need a credit card for incidentals. Now, Ricky is so young because he just graduated high school. He's like, I only have cash. He's like, I'm sorry, sir, but we require a credit card to secure the cabin. And Lizzie hands her credit card out. And she's like, here. And he's like, thank you. And she doesn't care. The fact that they're there, like...
Exactly.
Good enough.
And Daddy's money's going to pay for it.
Daddy's going to pay for this booty call, for sure. He doesn't know it yet, but he's paying for it. And she'll come up with some story like, oh, me and my girls just wanted to, whatever, you know.
Mm-hmm. So Daddy's going to be paying for that.
Oh, yeah. Now we're back at Clear River, and Brady is sitting at a bar patio, drinking a beer, just pondering life and his life choices, I'm sure.
Tell me about it.
And Bree's walking by. Now, she's clearly left Mel, who probably had to get back. Probably had to get back to docks. He's already maybe he works early in the morning because, he's a logger. So maybe they start really early. So Bree goes on the patio because she sees him, intrigued, and she's like very slyly walks up. She stands there and talks to him, and she's like, hey. And he's like, oh, you're Bree. Bree, right. And the waitress comes up, and she's like, what can I get you? And she's like, I'll have a whiskey sour. And she looks at Brady, do you want a drink? And he's like, no, thanks. I really should get going. And she's like, oh, I was just trying to be polite. He's like, well, if you're going to twist my arm, I guess I'll have another one. And he sits back down again, and the waitress leaves, and the two of them are staring at each other. Now, they have instant chemistry.
Oh, yeah.
Like, right out of the gate.
Yeah, he's bad boy, and she's just, I don't give a rat's fig, so.
Right, and she's going through something, so my guess is she's not going to play by the same rules she's been playing by.
No, girlfriend is looking for a bad boy in her life.
Right? She needs a little bit of outside of her comfort zone.
Right. She's looking for a rule breaker is what's going on here. Because she has followed the rules all her life.
Yep.
And so she is looking to break some rules here, girlfriend.
So Brady's like, I'll get the next round. And she's like, how do you know there'll be a next round? He goes, from experience. Oh, now he's going to get a little cocky. She's like, well, that's a bold statement. And he's like, does Jack know you're here? And she's like, no. Why? And he's like, well, he wouldn't want me having drinks with his sister. And she's like, oh, how'd you know I'm his sister? Small town. I might have asked around a little. And she's like, oh, you did you? She's like, okay. Any other dirt I should be aware of? And he's like, well, I heard you're an attorney. and you're single. She's like, wow, you got quite a grapevine. He's like, well,
Well,
did I hear wrong? Like they're just playing coy.
mm-hmm.
She goes, one is true and the other is complicated. And the lady brings the drinks, and he's like, oh, you going to tell me which is which? And she's like, doubt it. He's like, why? He goes, because I don't know you. Well, we should fix that. And they cheers their drinks and spend some time together. So now we're back at Jack's bar, and Preacher's like, you okay if I go? You know, I wanna have dinner with Christopher. And he goes, yeah, it's slow, don't worry about it. Probably gonna close up soon, no big deal. And he goes, so did you decide what you're gonna do about Mel? And he goes, well, I thought about staying with her, but he goes, yeah, but and he's like, well, I think I'm gonna check into the B&B. And he's like, Preacher's like, dude, why? Like, why would you do that? And he goes, well, it's easier. I won't have to worry about imposing on her. He goes, okay, true, but, you know, you could view it as an opportunity to find out if the two of you really connect.
Mm-hmm.
And Jack's like, and if we don't? He goes, well, that's not something I want to find out. He's not ready to find out if, I mean, things seem to be going really, really well for them. And I think he's afraid with everything else going bad in his life, he's like, I don't think he can handle one more thing happening. So he doesn't want to take the chance that they're not compatible.
Simpatico.
So, and Preacher's like, well, I gotta say, I have never known you to shy away from anything. And kind of that gives Jack something to think about. Then you hear Charmaine's voice in the background. Hey. She's like, oh, I could really use a 7 and 7 now. And Preacher's like, settle for a 7-Up? And she goes, yeah, well, that seems to be my drink of choice. Now, she's starting to show a little bit. And Preacher was going to get it, but Jack's like, no, I got it. You go ahead. And he says goodbye. Now, remember, she's engaged.
Yeah, she is.
Now, takes him for a walk down memory lane. And she's like, you know, I still remember the first time I came into this place. You spent 20 minutes trying to talk me out of ordering a white Zinfandel. My God. Hope said the same thing. She's like, Hope. Why do you drink that? And she goes, because I like it. She's like, why? Like, why?
Yes.
Maybe she just doesn't have very good taste. I don't know.
Everybody's got their drink of choice. And
I guess. So he's like, yeah, he tried to talk her out of it, but she says unsuccessfully, I might add, because she stood her ground and she drank her white Zinfandel. And she's like, yeah, well, I appreciated the effort. And she's like, doesn't that feel like a million years ago? And he's like, yeah, we've had a lot happen since then. She's like, yeah, we have. She's like, listen, I came here to apologize. And he's like, for what? I was really hard on you throughout our breakup. You think? Like, literally trying to break them up. Literally trying to, like, set traps and be rude and just make Mel's life and Jack's life so ridiculously complicated.
Difficult.
Oh, my God. She's like, I was really hard on you throughout our breakup. And I shouldn't have pushed you the way that I did. He's like, yeah, it's okay. She's like, no, it's not. I get it now. She's like, the minute I met Todd, it was like, whoosh, like an explosion. She's like, wow, you and I were never like that. And he's like, well, you know, I wasn't looking for anything permanent. And he's going about his business while he's talking to her. Like, he's picking up glasses and cleaning up counters and, you know, clearing tables. And, like, he's kind of talking to her, but he's not really engaged in the conversation. And she's like, I know. She was invested and he wasn't. And she should have listened to him.
Yes.
And he's like, thank you. She's like, anytime. And she's like, and I'm so happy that you found Mel. Like, what?
He didn't see that one.
Since when? Charmaine. She goes, because if you didn't, I never would have met Todd. It's like, oh, okay. It always just comes back to her. It's always all about her. okay, that's fine. That's where we are. That's where she is. And he's like, well,
Yeah.
I'm happy that you're happy.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe now she'll leave him alone. I know. He's like, but I gotta ask. I mean, I never pictured you with a guy like Todd. And she's like, why not? I mean, he even said that, like, Todd with his, like, she's not into the money. So he was trying to figure out what is it about this guy that has attracted her. Because, yeah, money's important, but even he knows that that wasn't her draw to him. So there
Right.
must be something else. And Jack's
Well,
like,
and yeah, I'm thinking because the thing about it is Charmaine is looking for security for herself and her twins.
and money would do that, but
You,
a
but yeah,
decent
but
job would also do that.
right. But I think for her is she wants somebody stable who's there for her, committed to her. And Jack wasn't those things.
No.
I mean, in the sense of he's there, but he's not there for her.
He's not daily there. He's not
Right.
going to be getting up in the middle of the night with her with the babies, and he's not going to, hold her hand walking down the street. Like she doesn't
right.
have that.
She needs emotional support also, not only physical support. She needs, because Jack can give her the physical support. He can't give her the emotional support.
Yeah, exactly.
And
Jack's just like, I don't know what you see in this guy. Like, he doesn't seem like your type. And he's like, the personal barber and the income property. And he's like, he's a little much. And she's like, no, that's what I love about him. He's confident. Which, okay, yeah, he's confident. He oozes confidence, like almost too much. Like, it's overpowering. She's like, and he wants to get married and have a big family. And thanks to his income properties, you don't need to worry about finding another place for the twins. Now that piques Jack's curiosity. He's like, what? Like, his brows furrow, and he's like, what does that mean? And she's like, well, I heard about the fire. I'm so sorry, by the way. She's like, but at least you don't have to stress about finding another house. And he's like, I'm not stressed. I spoke to the contractor about rebuilding. Like, not a big deal. She's like, oh, construction always takes longer. And, instead of renting a house or whatever, Todd and I live together and in a house. And it's got a big yard and a pool. And my house will be ready within 6 months, he's telling her. And the kids won't even be walking by then. So, he's like, it's not a big deal. And she's like, I'm just saying that if you decide not to rebuild or whatever, you can visit the twins whenever you want. And he's like, oh, that
Yep, that, I know that sentence did not go over well.
He's not an uncle. He's not the next door neighbor. He's not the milkman. Visit?
Yep.
He's like, visit? Seriously?
Yep.
She's like, yeah. And Todd says, God. And Todd says, we don't even need a formal custody agreement. We can have an open door policy and you can come and go as you please. And Jack is looking at her like, wait a minute. Who's the father? Who's the mother? Because as last time I checked, there's no Todd in that. Why is Todd all of a sudden making all these decisions about his children? And she's like, totally fine. She's like, oh, within reason, of course. Like open door policy. And then her phone vibrates, and she's like, oh, that's him. That's Todd. I gotta go. Thanks so much for the 7-Up. Bye-bye. And off she goes. And he's like...
And she basically leaves him with,
like, let me drop that bomb in your lap and take a walk.
And then walks away. Yeah,
Yeah. So Todd has decided that this is how it's going to be, and we're just letting you know.
Yeah.
I mean, it's almost like that conversation they had in her kitchen where she found out that he wasn't buying a house for them, and she's like, oh, okay, I get it. So you're going to have to deal with whatever situation I create for these children, and you're just going to have to hope, like she said, hope that you're part of it. And now that's coming true.
Yep.
Which I think he thought that would be the case at some point. I just did not think he thought it would be like a month later. She's barely showing. Like, seriously, what is this? I mean, some men are attracted to pregnant women, and some men have no problem raising other people's children.
Mm-hmm.
But she's not even showing yet. I mean, she got pregnant less than 6 months ago. I don't
Yep.
know. It's just weird to me. That just seems. I mean,
there's a whole lot about this relationship that we're gonna have to learn about as time goes by.
Oh, do we learn? Do
So
we learn?
so I think that's basically thrown him off his knockers.
Oh yeah, he is definitely off-putted by that for
Yeah,
sure.
Jack did not see that one coming.
No, not this soon. Not this soon. I think he definitely thought down the road she would meet someone, they would get to know each other, they would, start dating, maybe after the twins were born, and eventually want to get married, and then he would be co-parenting with a couple. And he very very well thought that was going to happen. I mean, he wants that for her. But I think this is fast. This is really fast and way too fast for him. So now we're back at the cabin with Ricky and Lizzie, and they're watching some black and white TV show, which I'm sure the reception is fabulous there.
Yeah. Well, it's called Ed. Ed the Talking Horse.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
Yeah. So
it's a very very old TV show, way way back.
Oh, very old. It's older than me.
Yeah. So the cabin is adorable. It's got a fireplace. It's very rustic looking, very homey and lived in, and they're just she's laying on the bed watching this show. And Ricky comes back and she's like, "Geez, did you go all the way back to Virgin River for ice?" And he's like, "We need to leave. I saw Charlie in the parking lot." She's like, "Who's Charlie?" Now remember Charlie?
Yeah, I know who Charlie is.
Charlie is the patient of Doc's who doesn't like lady doctors, but he also supported Mel because he was adopted when the whole Chloe situation came up. Really nice guy, but Ricky's freaking out because he saw Charlie in the parking lot. And Lizzie's like, "What?" He goes, "Charlie, gray hair, hangs out at the bar. That really old guy." And she's like, "And?" He's like, "Well, the desk clerk, that's his nephew." "I mean, what are the chances?" And she's like, "In a place like this, pretty high. I mean, we're in a small town." So everybody knows everybody. He's like, "Charlie knows everyone." And she's like, "So?" "Well, he could tell Connie we're here, and then Paul could tell someone who knows Connie." And he's spinning. He's spinning. Right?
Oh, he's out of control.
She's like, "Who's Paul?" And he's like, "The guy who checked us in." She's like, "Oh my God, that guy doesn't care what we're doing. And Charlie, he's like 100. And she's trying to calm him down. She's like, "I bet he's already forgotten he even saw you." He goes, "Look, we're both in this amazing cabin all alone." And he's like, "I know." She goes, "So we shouldn't waste our time talking, okay?" And he's like, "I'm sorry. I can't stop thinking about Connie." He's like, "Would you rather think about Connie or would you rather think about me?" He's like, "Oh, you, of course." And then she starts to unbutton her shirt. And he's like, And she's like, "Does that help?" He goes, "How about another one?" And she goes, "Yeah, that's much better." So they're obviously going to have a lovely evening.
That boy is a worrywart.
Yeah, he is. He can't help it.
Right.
He was raised by his grandmother. She was probably very overprotective, and he hasn't had a lot of life experience. So.
Well, also, he's not good at rule breaking. This is the whole thing.
No. He was raised very straight and narrow.
Right. And she is Miss Rule Breaker herself. If there's a rule to be broken, Lizzie's going to break it. And that is not who he is.
Mm-mm.
So all of this sneaking around and not telling the truth.
Yeah, it's very uncomfortable for him. So now we're back at Doc's house, Doc and Hope's house. The phone's ringing, and he's still trying to reach Hope. And he keeps getting busy signal or a machine, like her answering service, trying to leave a message. And he's just getting more and more worried.
Yep.
And Mel walks up. And because he's out on the back porch where they have like a little table set up and everything. And he's like, "What? Did I forget something at the office?" She's like, "No, I was in the mood to play cards and Jack's busy, so." And he's like, "I'm just not really up for it." She's like, "Just one game. Just one." And he's like, he kind of chuckles at her. And he's like, "Okay." And she's like, "Great. Perfect." So he's like, "So what are we playing?" She's like, "Go fish." And he's like, "Really?" She's like, "Well, it's the only game I know how to play."
Wow, that's not everybody's a card shark,
right?
Yeah.
And he's like, "This is obviously about Hope." She's like,
Yeah.
no, I just like playing cards. And he's
Mm-hmm.
like, well, I still haven't heard from her if that's what you want to know.
Yep.
And so
And he's
she deals the cards out, and she's like, have you seen the news? And he's like, yeah, it made landfall about an hour ago. And he's like, the footage was so bad, I had to turn it off. And she's like,
oh,
well, watching isn't going to help anybody.
he's in a bad place
Oh, yeah, yeah.
because he's making phone calls.
Can't reach anybody. He has no idea where she is, how she is, what's going on, nothing.
Mm-hmm.
So Mel's trying to distract him, and so she's like, okay, I'll go first. Like, go fish, really? She's like, do you have any sevens? And he's like, this is silly. Why don't I teach you how to play solitaire? She goes, seven or no seven? And he's like, stubborn. Just like Hope. And she smiles, and he's like, go fish. She gives him a side eye. And I mean, you can tell this is, he hasn't let it get to him because he's been like trying to be strong and keeping busy and going about his day and working at the clinic. And it's at night when it's quiet and you're by yourself that's when it hits. And he's like, if I could just get a hold of her, I'd be, I don't know, he'd be fine. And she's like, have you tried the local police station? He's like, oh yeah, but all the lines are jammed. Everything is busy. Can't reach anybody. And she's like, well, it seems like there's not much else she can do. He's like, I know, but it's like driving me crazy. She goes, of course it is.
And you can tell he's just not.
Yeah, he's trying to be distracted. So he's like, do you have any nines? And she has one. He's like, right now the storm surge is at 10 feet.
Whoa. That's a lot.
And she's like, wow. And he's like, if they're still at the house, the chances of drowning.
Yep.
And she's like, well, okay, well, what about rescue efforts? And he's like, impossible. The wind's like over 100 miles an hour. Like, they can't do anything until this thing passes. I mean, that's just the way things work. And he's just sighing, and he starts getting more and more upset. And he's like, you have a king? And she's like, go fish. And he's just sitting there, and you can tell it's just starting to really build and get to him. And then he starts to cry. It's so sad to see Doc just like lose it.
Yeah.
And his eyes look so, so blue when he's sad because they get red, and he's got the most beautiful blue eyes.
Yeah.
Mel's like, I know how hard it is to wait, but we just have to be patient. And he just can't take it anymore. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, because Mel has been through everything in her life that she can relate to anybody's anything, it's just the horrendous things this woman has been through. And she's like, when Mark was in surgery for 3 hours before he passed away, she's like, the not knowing was unbearable. Just waiting to hear. She's like, so I understand the pain that you're in. And he reaches over and holds her hand. She goes, and you lost him anyway. She's like, no. That was my story. That doesn't mean it's going to happen to you. He goes, well, it could. And she's like, well, yeah, but for now, we still have hope. And then they both start laughing. She's like, sorry. He goes, that was so bad. She goes, I apologize. That was completely unplanned. And they just kind of groan and laugh. But he needed that. She's like, thank you. Thank you for coming over. Because he really appreciates it. And she's like, I just want you to know that you're not in this alone.
That was just too funny.
I know. It's like, God, just a few short months ago, they were like screaming at each other. He fired her. She called him an ass.
He not only fired her once, he fired her twice.
Oh, he fired her a lot. He probably fired her secretly many more times, but. So now we're back at Preachers.
Mm-hmm. And Connie is there. And Connie is doing a very interesting task that a lot of people have experienced.
She's like, we're up to 10. And Connie's like, oh, I got 3. And he's like, hey, what are you guys up to? And he's like, preach, I got bugs in my hair. And she's got a
plastic.
She's got a plastic cap on her head and a light over Christopher's head with tweezers or a comb or something. And she's like, he's like, what? And she's like,
did you get the email about the lice incident?
Yeah, there's a lice outbreak at camp. Ugh. And he's like, no, I didn't see this. She goes, so how bad is this? Well, I've stripped the beds, washed all the towels, and Christopher's clothing. When I'm done with his hair, I'm going to start on your closet. He goes, no, 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 no. You don't have to do that, and it's late. And she's like, you're welcome to take over if you like, but even if one of these little nits gets loose, oh, we got to rewash everything and start the entire process over. And he's like, oh my gosh, then you should probably keep going, because this is new to him. He goes, preach. Google says lice attach themselves to human hair, and you want to know how they hold on? He goes, no, not really. They use their sticky feet, which is where the episode gets its title, which is kind of a weird reason to call it that.
Exactly.
I didn't get that. But okay.
Mm-hmm.
And Christopher's like excited that he's got bugs in his hair. Like he's smiling from ear to ear.
Only a kid.
Oh my God.
Only a kid could find that interesting.
Right?
While the parents are freaking the hell out because
kids love bugs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. They can thank you, but no thank you.
And he's like, oh, sticky feet. Okay. So then he gets a letter in the mail addressed to him, and the return address is just a PL, which is Paige Lassiter. He knows it's from Paige. And he opens it up, and it's a patient medical record and a note. And the note says, here are some documents you may need. I really want to come home, but right now that's impossible. I've already had to move 3 times. I can't trust anyone. It feels like the walls are closing in. Anyway, I miss you, and I'll see you when it's safe, or I'll contact you when it's safe. Please be careful. And she signed it. I'll be in touch when it's safe. Please be careful, Paige.
He had to move 3 times.
This guy is tracking her down.
Yeah, he is not letting up, man. Just not letting.
This is a really cute scene. I love the scene. They use they screenshot part of this scene, and it's used in a lot of promo stuff because it's just adorable. So we're back at Mel's cabin, and she gets back. He's doing dishes. She's like, sorry I'm late. I stopped off to see Doc. And he's like, oh, no worries. Any word from Hope? And she's like, oh, no, but it sounds like that hurricane is pretty bad. And he's like, should I call him? And he's like, no, he's going to go to bed, but maybe stop in and see him tomorrow. I'm sure he'll appreciate that. She goes, so I got you some clothes. He goes, what? You didn't have to do that. I told you I have a few things at the bar. And she's like, I know, but eventually you're going to run out of socks. And he's like, well, if eventually you mean tomorrow, you're right. And so he grabs her shirt, like her jacket, and he kind of pulls her close. And he's like, thank you. You're welcome. And they're just so cute. Kissy, kissy. And he's like, so what made you think of going to the store? And she's like, well, if it was me, I wouldn't want to be reminded of everything I lost by having to wear the same clothes over and over again. And he's like, oh, you're truly are a beautiful person. You know that? And she just smiles. I mean, the way they look at each other is just adorable. The chemistry between these two is really good. And I know that they're friends outside of the show, which makes this relationship work so much better. It's like they had instant chemistry, which is actually really hard because they never, a lot of times when couples are put together on a show, they have them do a test read together, especially for movies, where they see how they interact and they give them scenes just to see their interactions. They never did that. This was so like by chance.
Yeah, they were lucky.
They were very lucky. The first time they ever sat together was at a table read before they started filming. Like they had the characters, they had everybody picked, and I think they just hoped for the best. I mean, can you imagine if they didn't mesh?
Get along.
Like that, like the show would not be where it is today. Absolutely, 100%.
I would agree with you there.
Because they get along so well and their chemistry is very evident and they have the same humor, so they get along just really, really well. This works really well. Because she has said when they're filming, it's like you have to kind of like throw yourself into the character. You know, you've got to like live that character in those moments. And the first couple of years, they didn't think the show would last. They thought, oh, we're only going to have one season, so let's just give it 110%. Let's throw everything we've got into it because nobody's going to watch it. Nobody's going to see this. It doesn't matter. Let's just, yeah. And they say that every year. Now they don't say it because now we're getting ready to drop season 6. But the first couple of years are like, oh, this is season 3. They're filming season 3 and they barely just released season 1. And they're like, nobody's going to watch. Nobody cares. Let's just have fun with it. Let's just go. Let's just have a good time and enjoy. And it worked. It just, it's the right concoction of everything that worked. The special sauce. So he's like, I'm serious. I'm always, you're always thinking about how to make other people's lives better. And she's just like, oh my gosh, I can't believe he's saying this to me, and looking at him. He's like, where does this come from? And she's like, I don't know. My mom was like that. He's like, oh, I wish I would have gotten to know her. And she goes, you would have loved her. And he's like, well, I certainly love her daughter. It's like, aw, aw. And I give it a little smoochy smooch. And that right there where they're holding each other, looking at each other for like just a brief second, that is like an iconic. I use that in so many promo things. So she's looking in the bag, and he takes the towel he was drying the dishes with, and he kind of winds it up and smacks her on the back of the butt with it. And he's like, does that invitation for me to stay still stand? And she's like, yes! Like, she's so excited. Like, oh my gosh, what was he thinking wanting to stay at the B&B? Goodness. And she's like, yes, of course it does. And she grabs him by his head and gives him a kiss, and he's like, okay, good. Gives him a big hug. And he's very hesitant. And there's reasons behind that, but he's hesitant.
Yeah, he doesn't want to intrude on her. He's trying to be very considerate.
Yeah.
It's a difficult place to be.
So now we're still in Clear River. Apparently, Bree and Brady, even though they hung out together for a drink, they're still together. It's now dark. They've left the bar, and he kind of grabs her, and he's like, just to be safe, I don't think you should drive. Because she's a little tipsy.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, so then let's go back to your place. And he's like, how about I take you back to Jack's instead? He's like, or we could find something else to do. She's like, this was fun. And he's like, yeah.
Yeah, he's trying to be a gentleman here because of who she is.
Oh, yeah, because Jack is already pissed at him. This will not go over well.
Yeah, I think if this was anybody else, he
wouldn't care.
He would have taken her up on that invitation to go to her place. But this is Jack's sister, and he's not treading on those waters, honey.
He might. So he's like, you're a hell of a pool player. And she giggles and whatever, and she's like, look, I don't want you to think that I'm taking advantage or anything. And she's like, hey, I never do anything I don't want to do. He goes, you are so freaking gorgeous. You know that? He goes, is that what you think? And he's like, mm-hmm. She's like, don't you want to kiss me? He's like, of course. It's just, and he's like, oh, and he's like, Jack is, and she's like, so upset with me right now. She's like, no one needs to know. It could be our little secret. And she's just getting closer and closer. Even the music is like, okay, and closer, and okay, so now we're going to kiss. And she's just such a little tiny thing that he lifts her up, and she's got her legs wrapped around him, and they're kissing in the middle of the street, by the way.
How about to say that? In the middle of the street.
Okay, so got to tell you something about that. This was one of their first scenes together.
Oh, wow.
So,
that's a way to,
right?
That's a way to know one another.
And that's what she said. Now, Alex Breckenridge said, at least with Jack and Mel, like, they spent 2 years. Literally, it was the 8th episode for one kiss, and then the second or third episode of the second season before, wham bam thank you ma'am. So they had a good year and a half ish to get to know each other, and plus their characters with the looks and the stares and the coy and the sexual tension, and they built up to it. So it was like, by the time they were kissing and doing other things, it was cool. Like, they were fine.
Yeah.
Like, it was a natural progression kind of a thing. But
Yeah, but with
but
these two, that not happen.
Zibby Allen was like, it was like, hi, how you doing? Shake my hand. Now I want you to pick me up. I'm gonna straddle you in the middle of the street, and we're gonna make out, like on like day 2 or something. She's like that. She's like, that's the only part that's hard, is like you don't even know this person, and now you have to like straddle them and kiss them or something. And that's weird. That's a weird thing, but that's the way it is.
That's what acting's all
That's
about.
that's TV for you, you know?
Mm.
Yeah. She's like that was interesting. She's like, but fortunately they get along really well. Ben Hollingsworth, who plays Brady, is really sweet guy, and they have great chemistry, the two of them. It was obvious the second he sat down at the bar and she's teasing him about, yeah, I used to live with Jack. Like, what? Like, it was evident right away. So
Right.
it worked, but it's a weird thing. Acting, they said, is just a weird job sometimes. So
It is a weird job, and I think we take it for granted that depending on what your job is, you're smooching with somebody who is not your spouse or your significant other.
right.
And it takes a lot for your significant other to get used to the fact that you're making out with somebody.
Right.
This holds true especially for people who do soap operas.
Yes, because it's a daily thing. Oh my gosh, remember when
oh, yep.
Yeah.
It's a daily thing. I mean, with them, at least it's not on a constant basis to
Right.
some degree, but
it can be. It can be depending on the storyline. They can be in bed for like 3 days. It just depends on the storyline.
But the thing about soap operas are that because depending on who the character is, you could be switching up partners in a year time. You can be.
You could be dating, married, divorced, and seeing other people 3, 4, 5 times in a year.
Yeah. So
it's every day. It's like a movie every day.
It's pretty constant there. So
I mean, what this show is in a season, which is 10 episodes, 1 hour each.
Mm-hmm.
A soap opera does that in 2 weeks,
yeah.
and they got 50 more weeks to go. So, yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot. But if you get along, it's great.
Yeah.
It's when you don't get along that's when your acting chops really show through. And there have been many couples who don't get along on set, but you wouldn't know it because they're
good at their job.
They're good at their job. But fortunately, this particular cast, they get along really well. Everybody respects everybody. Everybody gets along really well. And even now that they're into their 6th year, I mean, they're like a family. I mean, I've heard that even a lot of the crew is almost all the same from the beginning.
Oh, that's good.
So it's a really good group. It just seems like such a fun place to work. So, and a beautiful place too. I mean, they all love just going up there for the few months that they have to go there. They're like, it's so much work, but it's like a getaway too, because it's just so beautiful. So now we are back at the cabin.
Yes.
And Mel is making some tea. And there's a knock at the door. And it's Lily. And she's like, hi, Lily. She goes, oh, I'm so sorry. If it's too late, I can come back. And she goes, no. Jack just had to run to the bar, so you're fine. Come on in. And she's like, I left a voicemail, and Doc said you were looking for me. And she's like, yeah, I'm so sorry. She's like, I didn't know who else to tell. And she starts to cry. And Mel's like, Lily, are you okay? Is something wrong? Is it Chloe? And she's like, I have cancer.
Oh, jeez.
And I mean, like, Lily hasn't been through enough. I mean, she had a baby in secret and then gave her, like...
She suffered from postpartum
depression and almost lost Chloe. Finally got her back because her daughter, Tara, came to stay with her to help her. And now she has cancer. I mean, she lost her husband 6 months before the baby was born. And now she has cancer. And Mel's like, oh my gosh.
Yep.
And that's where we end it.
That's where it goes. Another cliffhanger, because
every episode, some are bigger than others, but every episode is a cliffhanger. And sometimes we move on to the next morning, and sometimes we move on to the next minute. So
it's true.
I feel like sometimes the episodes cliffhanger tend to roll into each other. Like you could literally not end the episode and just keep playing it.
Mm-hmm.
Almost like a commercial break.
Yeah.
Whereas, because minutes or the next morning is about as very rarely do they go beyond that.
Yeah.
Sometimes they'll say 2 days later, 10 days later, whatever. But a lot of times it's like the next minute, the same conversation the next morning. Whereas season cliffhangers tend to be a couple weeks, a month, a few months, depending on the situation. You know, like with Jack getting shot in the end of season 2, it was 3 weeks later that season 3 picked up. So I feel like that's where they get their time jump, but the actual season is, it's like every season is like 2 or 3 months of their lives. So here we are, we're in beginning of season 3, which technically should be 3 years, is like 7 months. Yeah. By the time we get to the 5th year of the show, season 5, we're only going to be at about 9 to 10 months. Maybe 10 months or so. Yeah. It's crazy. It's that, and people love it and hate it for different reasons. They love being able to experience every minute, but they hate that it seems that we go so slow. But then again, I mean, you get to experience everything. You feel like you're not missing much. And then when they do speed up, they're like, wait, what happened? What happened? It's like, wait a minute, you said speed up. We speed up, now you're not happy again. It's like, really? So
it's just wow.
No one's ever going to be happy. You can't please all the people all the time. So, writers, you do you. You do your job and keep entertaining us, and we're here for it.
Yes, we are.
So there we are. That was the end of season 3.
Episode 2.
And wow, we got a lot to unpack on the next episode.
We do.
Ooh, a lot happens. A lot happens in a short time, so.
It does.
All right. Well, thank you, Gigi, once again.
Thank you, folks, for listening to us.
Thank you so much for being here for it, and hope you're enjoying our banter and our shenanigans and our commentary on everything Virgin River. All right. Well, we will.
Till next time. Au revoir.
Be back for the next one. Have a great day. Bye-bye.